How do you think that the anti-gravity technology that's using gravity as a power source, how is that happening? Do you have a brief explanation on?
I really think it's gravity control and gravity wave control. As for a power source, I think the power source was better described as this quantum vacuum energy or zero-point energy. But it's like two separate things but are related. So you can have a zero-point energy system or a free energy system. It doesn't move and it's not affecting gravity, but at a certain resonant frequency and power, and has to do with vortices, toroidal energy patterns, you can then cause what I call mass cancellation, where an object literally takes on weightlessness. Now, if you go back in the documentary, we touch on this, all the way back to T. Townsend Brown and what was later called the B-Phil-Brown effect. In the late 1920s, he took a very high voltage system at a very certain, with wires around a crystalline material, and it levitated, just floated. Now, that was almost 100 years ago, late 20s. That was then the Kautsky-Frost experiment in Germany, around the same time, confirmed it. Later, the whole B-Phil-Brown effect, studying very high voltage VHV systems, began to be increasingly studied and classified in the 30s and 40s. By the time World War II ended, Adolf Hitler had a disc-shaped electrogravitic, but it wasn't stable, which is why he could never use it in the war. But it was brought back to America by Paul Mellon and Patton, General Patton, and Allen Dulles. So that device actually became a very important object to study at the end of World War II. And of course, that technology got advanced greatly by studying the extraterrestrial materials that we also were beginning to acquire by using electromagnetic weapons to down the ET craft. So you had two rivers of technology being developed from the 20s, 30s, 40s that intersected with the extraterrestrial technologies, and they hybridized them.
Shit.
So that's what happened between 1945 and 55, that decade.
How many different ways do you think how many different ways are there to harness this kind of energy?
Oh, I think there are dozens.
How did Tesla do it?
Tesla, I think, was actually capturing resonant magnetic field energy of the Earth that's almost boundless. So there are a lot of, quote, free energy approaches. I think the ones that use these very high voltage systems that create a sort of a vector, a tap, as it were, into this quantum vacuum energy and zero-point energy field, those began to be stumbled across, but sort of episodically as a phenomenon back in the late 1800s, because that was the heyday when they were first discovering electromagnetism. And I think Maxwell and Faraday, some of these guys stumbled across this, but they didn't know what it was. You were getting more energy out than you had to put in. So I think you can have a rotational coil-based device. Floyd Sweet, who we feature in the movie, had a solid-state device that was about this big that could run a 300 horsepower electric engine for your car. No other batteries, the little teeny...
you had video of that.
Yep, we have video of it. It was tested by a Lieutenant Colonel, Tom Bearden, who's a very dear friend of mine, just passed away. He handed off all of what he knew about this to us. We have a file that was a CIA operative named Sajaki that I knew, but he had a guy I know named John Bedini, who was allowed to copy a bunch of confiscated patents, and we have that disk. So we need to send up a research lab to do this and get to the bottom of it, I think, Shawn, very quickly, because we need to do it. Look, if this technology came out in the next year or two by a group that could just put it out, open source it, thousands of companies would then adopt it, and we'd be able to really transform the trajectory of the planet. Now, there are going to be certain losers in that process. Like any new technology, oil, gas, coal, centralized public utilities, they'll all have to be retired. But keep in mind, it's going to take 15 years to do this. You know, your car and my car running, if you have a conventional vehicle, 100 million vehicles are made a year. There are 1.5 billion motor vehicles on the road worldwide. That's 15 years if you waved a magic wand and converted every manufacturing entity to a zero-point electric system. That's not going to happen. So, you know, it's going to take a couple of decades to make this transition anyway. It should have happened 100 years ago.